to figure out Terah's lifespan. Well, Terah, we know, lived 205 years, but Abram wasn't born the year Terah died, because Terah took his son Abram and Lot, the son of Haran, and came forth out of Ur of the Chaldees. So we have a little bit of a challenge. Where do we put Terah on this list? He's after Nahor. Well, we know that take a look again at Genesis chapter 12 and verse 4. So Abram departed as the Lord had spoken unto him, and Lot went with him, and Abram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. So if we now take the 205 years that Terah lived, how old he was before he died, and we take 75 away from that, because that's how old Abram was when he left Haran, when his father must have died, Terah was 130 years old. If I take 205 minus 75, Terah was 130 years old when Abram was born. So now we have Terah in our next list of the generation markers. And Abram, we now need to see, as God goes through the history of the world, what happened to Abram? How old was he before we have the next generation marker? Well, we know Isaac was the next one. But let's take a look and see how old Abraham was, because Abraham is after Terah. Go to Genesis 21, verse 5, chapter 21 of Genesis and verse 5. And there we read, Abram was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born unto him. So we know Isaac was a direct son of Abram. So Abraham is our next list of 100 years after Terah lived 130. So Abram is 100 years old, he has Isaac. What's the next clue God gives us about lifespan for Isaac? Genesis chapter 25, verse 26. In Genesis 25 and verse 26, and after that came his brother out, and his hand took hold on Esau's heel, and his name was called Jacob. And Isaac was 60 years old when she bare them. So we know that Isaac was 60 years old when Jacob was born to him. So we had Abram at 100 years. Now Isaac lived 60 years. How about Jacob? Do we know anything about Jacob's lifespan in the Bible? To continue the calendar, we do, all the way in Genesis chapter 47 and in verse 1. Then Joseph came and told Pharaoh and said, my father and my brethren and their flocks and their herds and all that they have are come out of the land of Canaan, and behold, they are in the land of Goshen. So now we see when Joseph was in the land of Egypt, Jacob was still alive in Canaan, and we go all the way down to verse 9 of this chapter. And Jacob said unto Pharaoh, this is now when Jacob came into Egypt to escape the famine, the days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil have the days of the years of my life been, and have not attained unto the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their pilgrimage. So how long did Jacob live before they went into Egypt? 130 years. He tells Pharaoh that in verse 9. So the next person on my list is Jacob in the line of God's generation markers, 130 years. Well, how long were the children of Israel in Egypt? That's the next time frame God gives us in the Bible. If we go to Exodus chapter 12 and verse 40, we'll pick up what happens after Jacob had entered with his descendants, his sons and their children and their wives. In Exodus 12 verse 40, we read, now the sojourning of the children of Israel who dwelt in Egypt was 430 years. And it came to pass at the end of the 430 years, even the selfsame day it came to pass, that all the hosts of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. So God's really emphasizing here that there were 430 exact years from the time that Joseph was already in Egypt. But when Jacob, his father, came with all his brethren and their families into Egypt, they were there for 430 exact years. So we know Jacob lived 130 years, and then 430 additional years after that, the children of Israel leave and have the exodus from Egypt. Well, there we are. So far in the generation markers, now in time frames that God gives us, we still need more information to tie it into our calendar for today. So let's go to 1 Kings chapter 6, and we're going to pick up an interesting reference here that ties all of this to our current calendar today. In Exodus chapter 12, we read about the 430 years of the sojourning of Israel. But in 1 Kings chapter 6, we're going to read in verse 1 of 1 Kings 6, we read, And it came to pass in the 480th year after the children of Israel were come out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month Ziph, which is the 2nd month that he began to build the house of the Lord. So how many years after the Exodus did Solomon begin to build the temple? The Bible tells us 480 years after the children of Israel came out of Egypt. So that's the next time frame we list. Exodus was 430 years after Jacob came in to Egypt. Solomon's temple was begun 480 years after that. So since the flood of Noah's day, we have 15 different time frames that are given to us. And we had those generation markers from Shem and all the way down, his descendants, Terah, Abraham's father. Abraham lived 100 years. He had Isaac. Isaac lived 60 years. He had Jacob. Jacob lived 130 years. He came into Egypt. 430 exact years later, Israel leaves Egypt with the Exodus. 480 exact years after that, Solomon's temple is begun in his 4th year of reign. We read here in 1 Kings chapter 6. Let's take a look at one more time frame. In 1 Kings chapter 11, we're going to see how old Solomon was when he died, how long did he reign. In 1 Kings 11, verse 42, we read, "And the time that Solomon reigned in Jerusalem over all Israel was 40 years. Solomon slept with his fathers and was buried in the city of David, his father." So we see here that Solomon died after he had reigned 40 years. How many years was he reigning when the temple began? 4. So we saw that the temple was begun 480 years after the Exodus, and Solomon died in his 40th year after he reigned over Israel. So how long did Solomon live after the temple started? 36. It's 40 years that he reigned minus the 4, because it was already in his 4th year that the temple was started. So in our time frames, our references, we have Abraham at 100 years, Isaac 60, Jacob 130. The Exodus was 430 years later. The temple was begun exactly 480 years after that, the Exodus, and Solomon dies 36 years after the temple started. What's so significant about that? Well, God gives us these time frames. That's one big significance. But fortunately for us, we can tell from history that the evidence we have is that 931 BC was the death of Solomon. Now, we know that from a multitude of references and sources. For instance, in Edwin Thiel's book, The Mysterious Numbers of the Hebrew Kings, he has 931 listed as Solomon's death. Nelson's Encyclopedia of Bible Facts, it's called the Illustrated Encyclopedia of Bible Facts, lists 931 BC as Solomon's death. Also, we have Arthur Weil wrote a guide to the Hebrew kings and the antiquities of Upper Egypt. He had Pharaoh Thutmose III's death at exactly 1447 BC, which ties into the date of the Exodus and the Red Sea drowning, which is exactly in accord with Solomon dying in 931 BC, if we backtrack, which is what we're going to do now. Because we said there were 6,023 years from creation to the flood of Noah's day. And then we had the flood of Noah's day. We had all those generation markers and people listed. And we had all these ages given from these men. And we had all these dates given for the Exodus, Solomon's temple. Solomon died 36 years later. If we add all those together, it would tie us in from 931 BC. That means that the flood of Noah's day would have been in 4990 BC. That means that the earth was created in 11,013 BC. That is the year God created the world. According to our calendar today, 11,013 BC. 6,023 years later, the flood of Noah's day. Then we go from the flood of Noah's day in 4990 BC, all the ages of the generation markers given. Solomon dies in 931 BC, which ties us into today's calendar. Well, that's very interesting information. First of all, the Earth is only, since now we're in the year 2009, the Earth is a little over 13,000 years old. The Earth would have celebrated its 13,000-year history in 1988. There's no year zero when we go from BC to AD, so we look at 13,000 exact years from creation to 1988. But very interestingly, and we will close the study shortly with this reference, because the significance of 4990 BC being the flood of Noah's day is that God gives us some clues in the Bible about the end of the world. For instance, in 2 Peter chapter 3, and let's go there in the New Testament, in 2 Peter chapter 3, we read that God says in verse 3, knowing this first, that there shall come in the last days scoffers, walking after their own lusts, saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of the creation. For this they willingly were ignorant of, that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water, whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. What's it talking about here? It's referencing the flood of Noah's day. But the heavens and the earth which are now, by the same word are kept in store, reserved unto fire against the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men. So God is likening the coming of the end of the world, the destruction by fire of this world, ties it into, analogous to the flood of Noah's day in 4990 BC. The very next verse in 2 Peter 3 verse 8 says, but, beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, that one day with the Lord is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day. What did Peter talk about under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, the beginning of that chapter? Scoffers coming. When's the end of the world? When's the promise of his coming? All things have continued since the very beginning. God says, but look, from the creation, they're willingly ignorant of this. The world that then was perished in the flood. So he says, likewise, in the same manner, it's going to come at the end with fire. But he says, but, beloved, be not ignorant of one thing. A day with the Lord is as 1,000 years, 1,000 years as one day. Why does God give us that clue? What is that reference? Did God give Noah a warning of the end of his time, his world that he was living in? The destruction of the world and the earth by water only saved 8 men and women in the ark with the animals? He does. In Genesis chapter 7, verse 4, God tells us that Noah was given a 7-day warning. In Genesis chapter 7 and in verse 4, God says to Noah, for yet 7 days, and I will cause it to rain upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and every living substance that I have made will I destroy from off the face of the earth. God gave Noah that final 7-day warning. Interestingly enough, God tells us in 2 Peter chapter 3, beloved, don't be ignorant of the one thing, that one day with the Lord is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as one day. We now know the date of the flood from the calendar in Genesis chapter 5 and chapter 11, and the dates that God gives us further from the generation markers, leading us to Solomon's death in 931 BC, that we can tie in exactly to today's calendar. We know the flood was 4990 BC. If one day is as 1,000 years, and God gave Noah 7 days warning, 7,000 years, each day representing 1,000 years, 7,000 years later would be the time of the destruction of the world by fire. If we go from 4990 BC to 7,000 years further, we land exactly on the year 2011. Remember, there's no year zero in our calendar. We go from 1 BC to 1 AD in our modern calendar. So 4990 plus 7,000 takes us right to 2011. That is a very short time from now. God is telling us and warning us in 2 Peter chapter 3 that the end is very near. And he gives us a precise clue with those 1,000 years and representing one day, 1,000 years as one day. We're going to close with this one final thought, though. If it's 2011, that it's likely that God will end the world with a fire, a catastrophic fire, can we tell exactly from the Bible when in 2011 it could be? We do. Because in Genesis chapter 7, verse 11, we read, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month and the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up and the windows of heaven were opened. We know the flood was in 4990 BC. We know from earlier studying Genesis chapter 5 and 11 that Noah was 600 years old when the flood came, but it was exactly on the 17th day of the second month. If we go 7,000 years later, in 2011, the second month and the 17th day of the Hebrew calendar would be May 21st in 2011. May 21, 2011 would also be exactly the 17th day of the second month. And that date is the date of the rapture, when God would bring His people to heaven and begin this period of 5 months of excruciating judgment upon the world that would ultimately end in October 21st in 2011, exactly 153 days later. There's much evidence in the Bible that ties in so many things that lead to these dates. But at this point, we have the privilege to know that God has given us a timetable from the earth's creation until its end, and it would go from 11,013 BC to 2011 AD, and that would be the end of everything that God has created. So I leave you with this thought today. Are you ready to meet God? The end is very near. Just like He brought the flood in Noah's day to all the people that were alive, save Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their 3 wives, and the animals that He saved. Are you prepared for the rapture? Are you prepared for God's judgment when He will bring the fire upon this earth to burn it up, to create a new heaven and a new earth? The Bible gives us the answers, the clues. It gives us the remedy that without Jesus Christ, you cannot be saved. Without His righteousness, you cannot enter heaven, the new heaven and the new earth. May God bless you as you read His Word and study His Word and cry out to Him for mercy, that He might save you from this catastrophic fire that is soon to come.